February went by so incredibly fast. I mean, how are we even here right now? Hello everyone. My name is Shelby. Welcome back to my channel, Grace with Books. Today I'm going to be doing my February wrap-up and my March TBR. I read some amazing books in February that I can't wait to share with you. I read 9 books. Yeah! That's pretty good for the beginning of the semester. I did not think I was going to get that many in, but I did, which is awesome, so I'm super excited to share those with you. I read books from an array of genres, some I really liked and some I really did not. So let's get right into my reviews. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Winner's Crime by Mary Rutkowski, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is the second installment in the Winners trilogy, and I thought it was a really well done sequel. This was such a fast-paced adventure. While there was less action than in the first book, it was a little bit more about the characters and getting to see who they are. This book also had a lot more world building, which I really enjoyed. I liked how in the first book we got to know the characters, and in this book we got to know the world. The ending was completely shocking to me. I was just devastated, and it was just such a good ending despite the fact I felt dead afterwards. One of my favorite things about this book is the main character Kestrel and her relationship with her father. I talked a little about this when I talked about the first book, but their relationship is so interesting because it's this struggle between family and loyalty. And her father, who is the General Trajan, is feeling this mixed loyalty. Like, he is so incredibly devoted to the king and the kingdom, but he also loves his daughter, and to see that struggle with him and with her is such an interesting thing, and I really enjoyed it in this book. The reason I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 stars is because while I did enjoy this book so immensely, I felt that the 2 main characters, Kestrel and Aaron, were just dancing around each other too much, not communicating, and after a while it got old, so I gave it 4 stars, but that doesn't mean, of course, that I enjoyed it any less. Loved this book, highly recommend. 4 stars. The next book I read in February is Vicious by L.J. Shen. This book was recommended to me by Chandler Ainsley over at Chandler Ainsley's BookTube channel. I saw that she loved this book and the plot seemed interesting to me. It was enemies to lovers, it was forbidden, it was all this stuff I love in a romance, so I decided to pick it up and I loved it. Chandler was completely correct. It was just so complex and each of the characters had so many layers. I mean, Vicious, you hate him. You hate him so much, but you also love him because there are reasons as to why he is the cruel man that he is. And when you know those reasons, you start to feel that sympathy for him and grow to understand him more and eventually love him. I liked how they had flashbacks to the high school years. The 2 main characters went to high school together and Vicious tormented her and forced Amelia to leave town, and then they come together in their adult years and she has to figure out if she is willing to help him when he asks for her help. So it is just this incredibly complex story. The romance is great, the smutty scenes are great too, and I just overall really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read in February is A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Brigid Kemmerer, and I was really disappointed by this book. I gave it 3 stars. I loved the first book with a burning passion. I thought it was such a unique take on the Beauty and the Beast story by adding all these different layers, like Ren having to go through this curse every season, and with Grey having to go find girls in our world to go have him fall in love with. And I loved that our main character, Harper, had disability rep and she was so strong and was just honestly a badass, and I just loved the story, and I feel like everything I loved about the story was not in this book. Well, I think Brigid wrote a great book. It is well written, the plot is good, and it's so uniquely different than its predecessor. So that's why I gave it 3 stars, because it was well written and well plotted out and all those things. But the reason I'm upset with it is because I feel like some characters did a complete 180. As much as I love Grey, I didn't really want a whole book about him. I know I'm like alone in that thought, but I really wanted more more of Wren and Harper. And speaking of them, Wren was a completely different character in this book. He was so incredibly different than he was in the last book. He was cruel and mean, and I didn't like that switch, and I didn't know where that switch came from. It was like Bridget was trying to make us hate him, but we just had this whole book where we fell in love with him. So I had a lot of mixed feelings. I didn't like how the characters were portrayed. I didn't like how Harper was just like not in it, because she's my favorite character. And while I liked the new additions, I loved Leah Mara and her strength and her kindness, I hated everything else. That sounds horrible, but I did still give it 3 stars because it's well written, well plotted out, and I'm looking forward to the 3rd book. I hope that we'll get more from all of the characters, and I hope we'll get a better explanation of why Wren is behaving this way, because it just pisses me off. Like, that's honestly, I'm just disappointed. I was sad. The next book I read in February is Would Like to Meet by Rachel Winters. I talked a little bit about this in my top 5 contemporaries earlier in February, but I just want to stress again how much I loved this book. I gave it 4 stars. I absolutely fell in love with the script format, with all the hijinks that the characters got themselves into. I fell in love with the writing and the situations and just how the entire book wrapped up. I loved that I was constantly guessing who would be the main love interest by the end of the book, and I just think the entire concept of having a book about meet cutes and about can we see if people fall in love the way they do in the movies was just such a wholesome book, perfect for February, perfect for Valentine's Day. It was just such a freaking wholesome, wonderful book. Rachel Winters wrote such a wonderful book for the modern age and for people living today and dating and wondering if they can get that kind of movie romance. It was a fun, light read, perfect for anyone who just needs a fun, light read. So that is Would Like to Meet, 4 stars. What I read next in February was the last book in the Winters trilogy, The Winter's Kiss by Mary Witkowski. So good. 5 stars. A wonderful ending to this book. We open up with some of the characters' fates uncertain, like we don't know what's gonna happen, and I really enjoyed how it all played out. I loved the pacing. It was fast-paced without seeming rushed. We still got detail, and it was just so good. This is just everything a young adult fantasy should be. It had adventure and action and romance and moments where you're like, what's gonna happen? And it was just this roller coaster of emotions that I am so happy I got to experience. I think having Kestrel and Aaron separated throughout the last book gave me so much anxiety that I loved seeing them come together and really grow as a pair throughout The Winter's Kiss. And I think it ended on a really good note with hope for the future, and it was just a wonderful ending. I'm really happy I took a chance on this series despite being super late to the game, and overall I'm just really happy that I read it, and I can't wait to read more of her work. The next book I read in February is a book I'm not going to spend too much time on because I've talked a lot about this book over the course of the past month. It's been in 2 separate videos, and of course that is Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. I talked about it in my top 5 contemporaries. I talked about it in a whole review video I had for it, so just quickly, gave it 5 stars, really enjoyed the story of Penny and Sam, loved the representation of anxiety and depression in this book. I do think it could have had some content warnings, but overall really happy with it. And that is my short summary. If you want the long ass review, then please check out my review video for this book. Next up is a book I am so excited about, and that is Hunting Prince Dracula by Kerri Maniscalco. I loved this book. It took me a while to get into the first book of the series, Stalking Jack the Ripper, but this book just hooked me right away, and I was done so quick because I just consumed it. I gave this book 4.5 stars, and it was just such a thrilling sequel, and you don't think they can top that mystery in the last book, but they did, and it was so good, and I was so unsure the entire time who Dracula in this book was, and the ending just completely shocked me, and that is why I gave it such a high rating. I love Audrey, Rose, and Thomas. I think they are great characters, but I especially love love Audrey Rose, a woman who was trying to make her way in the forensic world at a time when that is completely dominated by men and where women aren't even supposed to be studying like science and these gruesome deaths and murders. They attend this school for forensic sciences and she's the only girl there and she proves her worth. I think this series overall just sends such a strong message about female empowerment, and if this lady in the 1800s can do it, you can in the 2020s. One thing I do wish we had gotten a little bit more of in this book is seeing Audrey deal with what happened in Stalking Jack the Ripper. That was really traumatic and I don't think we see enough of her dealing with that. So that would be my only adjustment, but other than that, I cannot wait for the next book. I can't wait for Escaping from Houdini and what that's gonna be. So super happy with this book and this series, and I'm loving it. The next book that I read in February is one I'm super sad about because I got it as an ARC in a fairy loot box and I'm sad to say I did not enjoy it, and that would be Wicked As You Wish by Rin Chupeco, and I gave it 2 stars. I'm so sad about this book. It's set in a world with an alternative history where all the fairy tales live together in this big world, and first of all, that was so confusing. I didn't understand the layout of the world, I didn't understand how they all fit together, and I think we could have benefited from a lot more background information. But what we do know is that there was this land called Avalon, and it was conquered by an ice queen, and everyone was killed, and other people escaped, and the prince is now living in hiding, hoping to one day regain his kingdom. Pretty simple, but it was so confusing. As I said before, every fairy tale was sort of smushed into this book with no explanation at all, and I felt overwhelmed and honestly my head hurt trying to figure it out. While I appreciate that the author was trying to make a statement about immigration policies and refugees coming to another land, I feel like they were just trying to do too much in this book, and the audience and the reader could have benefited from it being a little clearer. Fantasy and realism was not mushed together well in this book, and there were too many characters. I felt like every page we got a new character that I had to keep track of, and honestly I just couldn't. There were too many people talking at once, there were too many characters, and as I said before, my head just hurt reading this book. I don't want this to be just bad, and I do want to say that the writing was really well done. The descriptive imagery, the language was all really well done, but the plot and the characters and the world building could have been better and clearer. I think if the author had decided to focus on one thing, it would have been so much better, but because they were trying to do so much in this one small book, it became overwhelming. So 2 stars for Wicked As You Wish. Finally, I'm super excited to be ending the month on a good note, and that good note is Wonder Woman Psychology: Lassoing the Truth. This is my first nonfiction of the year, and I'm so happy I got it. Highly recommend if you're interested in psychology and pop culture. Wonder Woman Lassoing the Truth is a series of essays about the character Wonder Woman and applying a psychological, analytical lens to her character. There are so many wonderful essays in here about her being raised and how those influenced her heroism in the future, about making a statement about women in that era. I didn't know before reading this that the creator of Wonder Woman, Dr. Marston, was a psychologist, and that just blew my mind. I did physically annotate this book. I have lots of like highlights in here because I think it was just important to really highlight the great things about this book. One of my favorite lines was, when you need to stop an asteroid, you get Superman. When you need to solve a mystery, you call Batman. But when you need to end a war, you call Wonder Woman. There were just so many smart and great psychologists adding to this, applying psychoanalytical theory and feminism critique and all these amazing things that I had learned about in my classes, and to see them being applied to one of my favorite superheroes in a book was just mind-blowing and amazing. I gave this book 5 stars. They have a bunch in this series. They have Captain America versus Iron Man psychology, Black Panther psychology, The Walking Dead psychology, Westworld psychology, just so many pop culture icons being analyzed and critiqued through a psychological psychological lens, and it was just so good. Highly, highly recommend. And those were the wonderful books I read in February. It was an amazing reading month. I'm really happy I got to all these books, and now we're gonna go over my March TBR. So as usual, I don't have a bunch of books on my TBR for March because I want to give myself room to pick what I want and what I'm in the mood for, but there are 5 books that I really want to get to through the month of March. The first is The Shadows Between Us by Tricia Levenseller. This is a Slytherin romance, and it is about a woman who basically wants to woo the Shadow King, marry the Shadow King, and kill him for his crown. And I am super excited to get into it. I just got the exclusive copy from Fairy Loot, and I'm just so excited to get into it. The next book I want to read is Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibanez. This book is about a girl who is basically a stand-in for the queen. She goes where the queen is supposed to go in case there's like an attempt on her life, and when a king of another kingdom wants to marry her, she has to go in the queen's stead. I've heard it's loosely based off Bolivian politics. I know nothing about those, so I'm super excited for the book, plus the cover is gorgeous. Next up is super exciting. I'm going to read 3 Dark Crowns by Kendare Blake with Delancey over at Reading BRB. We are doing a buddy read throughout the month of March, and I am so excited to be reading this book. It is about 3 princesses, I believe, who are battling it out for 1 crown. That is all I know. Super excited to get into it. Next up, which is super exciting, I would like to read House of Earth and Blood, which is the new book out by Sarah J Maas, and I am also buddy reading this with Erin from Ripley's Reads. So excited about it because I've just been waiting for another Sarah J Maas book to dig my teeth into. It is currently shipping to me. I pre-ordered it, which means I probably wouldn't get it on the due date. I know that, but super excited to read this with Erin, and that is my March TBR. As I said, very bare bones, very basic, because I just want to leave it open in case other books catch my eye. And yeah, so that's it for this video. That is my February wrap up and my March TBR. If you liked this video, be sure to comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to get updates on when I post. I post every single Thursday for right now, and I cannot wait to see you guys in my next video. Bye, have a great March!